Welcome to the first episode of the series. Let's start at the beginning. Before Rome became an empire, before it stretched from Britain to the Middle East, it was just a cluster of villages on the banks of the Tiber River. This episode takes us back to the myths, the kings, and the early struggles that shaped Rome long before emperors ruled it. Let's begin with the Roman origins. Now, our sources for this are basically one book, Livy's History of Rome, written about 200 years after the events he describes. So we don't know how much of this is real history and how much is mythology, but it matters that the Romans believed these things to be true, and the stories reveal a lot about how Rome saw itself. So first, there were the twin brothers Romulus and Remus. Legend says that they were the sons of Mars, the god of war, and that their father abandoned them at birth because they weren't actually his kids. Then the twins were found by a she-wolf who adopted them and nursed them back to health. A shepherd found the wolf and the boys and raised them as his own. In time, the young men, now grown up, decided to found their own city. They recruited some friends, slew a giant named Camillus, whose land they then occupied, and they named their new settlement Rome. There was only one problem, though. Brothers quarreled, and when they did, Romulus killed Remus. That meant that Rome would bear the name of Romulus, and the legacy of its founder would forever be stained with fratricide. Okay, not the best origin story, but it's a good thing that the Romans kept the record straight. Because if they ever needed proof of their destiny to be conquerors, they didn't have to look any further than their own founding. But there was another story, too. It centered on Aeneas, a character from Greek mythology. In this telling, he was the son of the goddess Venus and a mortal man, Anchises. During the Trojan War, Aeneas escaped the sack of his city, Troy, and made his way to Italy. He and his followers endured hardship and adventure, battling gods and monsters along the way. Finally, after 7 years of wandering, he reached the shores of Latium, where he founded the city of Lavinium. From him, the Romans traced their lineage all the way back to the gods. Both stories, both sets of parents, reinforced Roman identity. They linked the Romans to the Greeks and to the Trojans. In both cases, Rome was a city of survivors, heirs to a glorious past, destined for even greater things. Now, in reality, Rome's early history is obscure. Archaeological evidence shows that the area was inhabited as early as the 10th century BC, but we're really in the dark about the details. Our oldest written sources are from Greek writers like Dionysius of Halicarnassus and Plutarch, and they wrote those almost 2,000 years after the fact. They heavily relied on the Romans' own histories, and what those historians told them was a version of the past carefully crafted to reflect Rome's values and ideals. It mattered to the Romans that they could trace their history back to legendary figures like Romulus and Remus, and whether their story was completely true or not, the Romans used it to explain who they were and where they came from. The next period in early Roman history, the Age of the Kings, is little clearer. Tradition holds that Rome was ruled by 7 kings in all, starting with Romulus and ending with Tarquin the Proud. The length of their reign is hotly debated. The traditional dates put the start in 753 BC and the end in 509 BC, giving Rome a total of 244 years of kings. Modern scholars think that might be off by a few centuries. But here's what we think we know. By around 700 BC, Rome had become a small town with a population of maybe 10,000. According to Livy, it looked something like this. It sat atop 7 hills surrounded by a wall. Within it, temples rose beside houses, shops, and the Forum, which served as a marketplace and a center of civic life. Along the Palatine Hill stood the Palatine, the residence of Rome's elite. Most people, though, lived in the lower city, huddled into tight clusters of insulae or apartment buildings. They were crowded, noisy, and prone to collapse, but they were home. So the kings of Rome ruled this place. The first king, Romulus, supposedly established the Senate, an advisory council of elder statesmen. His successor, Numa Pompilius, was known for his piety and love of religion. Later kings pursued big building projects like the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's sewer system, and more palaces and temples. But the kings were also tyrants. After the death of King Ancus Marcius, his son, Tarquin the Proud, seized power and brought tyranny to Rome. He abused his authority, insulted the patricians, and finally pushed Rome into revolution. The Romans drove Tarquin out of the city and replaced kings with consuls, 2 men elected each year to serve as chief magistrates. In effect, the Romans traded one form of aristocracy for another. But why? How did Rome go from a village to a town to a city to a republic? Well, the key may have been Rome's location. First of all, Rome sat astride the Tiber River, which allowed the city to grow and flourish. Rome also controlled the approaches to the sea. Any ships entering Italy had to pass by Rome, either sailing up the Tiber or coming overland and crossing the Mediterranean. And that gave Rome leverage. As Rome grew, it exercised its power over central Italy, dominating trade and extracting resources from its neighbors. At the same time, the surrounding peoples pressed against Rome, creating both opportunities and threats. As Rome expanded, it forged alliances with neighboring states. And so, gradually, Rome built its dominance across Italy, attracting settlers and wealth, while its kings and later its consuls campaigned to secure the Italian peninsula. And this brings us to the heart of the matter. Rome wasn't just a city. It was a republic, a word that in Latin, res publica, literally means public matter. Rome was everyone's business. Every citizen had a stake in its success, and every citizen could help decide its future. And yet those citizens were divided. Roman society was stratified, but not in the way we usually think. The traditional division divides Rome into just 2 groups, patricians, the rich landowners, and plebeians, the common people. But that's a simplification. Roman society was more like a stack of layers. At the top sat the patricians, the aristocrats who held most of the power. Below them, the equites or horsemen, or Rome's middle class, men of property who gained wealth and power as Rome expanded. Below them, the largest group, the plebeians, the farmers, merchants, artisans, and laborers who made up the backbone of Roman society. Finally, at the bottom, the slaves who could be bought and sold had no rights and whose lives were entirely at the mercy of their masters. Rome's ruling class was made up of the patricians, the senators, and the equestrians. Senators were the elder statesmen who advised Rome's leaders, served on committees, and made policy. Equestrians were the wealthy cavalrymen who, as the middle class, formed the backbone of Rome's military. Consuls and praetors belonged to this group, as did the governors who administered Rome's provinces. The great wealth of Rome flowed into their coffers. But what about the other people, the majority of Roman citizens? Their lives were very different. Plea, the common people, were mostly poor, living in the crowded insulae in Rome. Farmers and independent workers, they had little political power, but they were vital to Rome's success. After all, Rome couldn't function without shopkeepers, farmers, laborers, or merchants. The plebea needed the Republic's protection, but they didn't have anyone to protect them. The patricians looked down on them, and the patrician magistrates ignored their concerns. To make matters worse, the rich could easily use their influence to exploit the poor. If a farmer went into debt, he could be forced to sell himself into slavery. If a merchant couldn't pay his debts, his creditors could seize his property. Over time, the plebea demanded change, and they got it. Through strikes and protests, they won the right to elect their own officials, the tribunes of the plea, who could veto laws harmful to the common people. Slowly, the republic became more equal, more representative, and ultimately more powerful. The growth of Rome during this period was nothing short of astonishing. Its domain stretched across Italy, its army boasted legions of professional soldiers, and its economy relied on a network of roads and allies. Rome was no longer a small village. It was a republic with laws, armies, and ambitions that would soon carry it far beyond Italy. This has been the series. If you want to learn more about the Roman world, subscribe to the channel and like the video. In the next episode, we'll see the rise of Roman Empire. We'll meet legendary generals like Scipio Africanus and learn how Rome crushed Carthage once and for all. Thanks for watching. See you next time.